GamingBolt presents 15 things you need to know before you buy Detroit Become Human. David Cage and his team at Quantic Dream have a special place in the hearts of PlayStation fans. Heavy Rain is considered to be one of the best games on the PlayStation 3, and while the reception for Beyond Two Souls was decidedly more lukewarm, it certainly had its fair share of admirers. Quantic Dream are now about to make their PS4 debut with Detroit Become Human, and our excitement for the game has been mounting with each snippet of it that we've seen. With not long left until its May 25th release, in this feature we're going to take a look at 15 of the most vital pieces of information on Detroit Become Human. Without further ado, let's jump right in. The setup. Detroit Become Human is set in a near-future version of the city of Detroit, and the central premise of its story revolves around the high-functioning and sentient androids. But rather than going for a story that shows us the demise of civilization at the hands of artificial intelligence, Detroit's dystopian narrative will be going in the opposite direction, showing us how androids are being subjugated and mistreated by the human population. Tackling a variety of issues. Quantic Dream aims to do a lot more than just tell a story with this setting. They plan on using this conflict between humans and androids as allegories for circumstances in the real world. The developers have claimed that Detroit Become Human will be tackling a variety of issues ranging across things like xenophobia, racial divides, domestic violence, economic instabilities, and much more. It remains to be seen whether they'll be able to handle any of this delicately, but the fact that they're trying certainly has us interested. The director's vision. In fact, the game's director, David Cage himself, has often explicitly emphasized in interviews that he wants to be able to meaningfully tackle issues that plague our real world through the story of Detroit Become Human, a story he feels is less about the revolution of androids and more about human identity and civil rights. Interestingly enough, he's also taken a rather interesting stance on violence within the game. Cage has often been outspoken on his views of gratuitous violence in video games, and while the violent approach in Detroit is certainly going to be a valid one, Cage wants players to feel the weight of these actions. A neo-noir thriller. Of course, the very premise of Detroit Become Human is inherently quite intriguing. Props to the game for attempting to tackle a multitude of actual issues, and we're hoping it'll actually do a good job of it, hard as that may be. But even viewed separately from those topics, Detroit Become Human seems like a pretty interesting setting. Set in a not-so-distant future version of Detroit, the game seems to be channeling the atmosphere of neo-noir settings such as Deus Ex and Blade Runner, and as millions of people will tell you, that's nothing if not encouraging. Built on a new engine. Quantic Dreams' games are always a pretty big undertaking for the studio, with numerous actors, loads of cutscenes, and literally hundreds, if not thousands of pages of dialogue and narrative to write. Detroit Become Human is going to be no different. In fact, it's going to be a lot bigger. In order to facilitate the game's more lofty ambitions, before they even began development on the game, Quantic Dream made an entirely new engine to build the game on. Multiple protagonists. Beyond Two Souls was a game that focused very heavily on the story of a single character, but Detroit Become Human is going to go back to the multiple protagonist approach that Quantic Dream took with 2010's Heavy Rain. Players will be able to take control of 3 characters, all of whom will be androids instead of humans. There's Kara, who will explore the factory she was manufactured in after she achieved sentience. There's Connor, an android investigator who tracks down and hunts deviant androids, criminals basically. And there's Marcus, who made it his mission to release as many androids from human servitude as he can. Tense dialogue encounters. Just like any Quantic Dream game, the bulk of Detroit Become Human's experience will be dominated by dialogue encounters between the large cast of characters, and many of it promises to be quite tense and thrilling. The dialogue choices during several of these conversations will often lead to a variety of interesting scenarios, giving these moments actual weight, or at least that's what the developers are promising. During many conversations, there will also be factors that will be completely outside of the player's control that will have an actual impact on how they turn out. Greater level of choice and consequence. Making decisions that impact the story is, of course, the main hook of all Quantic Dream games, and that's going to be the case with Detroit Become Human as well. Only by the looks of it, and judging by what the developers have been promising, how much the story diverges based on the player's choice will be much more drastic than it has ever been previously. Gameplay videos have shown that entire conversations and scenes can play out very differently based on your choices, and that's not even all. Of course, no game over screens. Carrying forward from the previous point, there won't be any wrong choices for players to make in Detroit, meaning no matter what you do, there is going to be no fail state, no game over screen. There's no way to fail any missions, meaning the game will react to whatever choices you make and just keep moving on. In fact, just like Heavy Rain, all of the protagonists can die as a result of your actions and decisions. Each one of them has no plot armor, according to the developers, and the game won't go back to its previous checkpoint if one of them does end up dying. The story will just keep on going and react to the circumstances. Choice flowcharts. This is one of the things that makes us optimistic about Detroit having choices and consequences that actually have weight. The game will allow you to view a flowchart of every chapter, which will reflect all of the branching paths in the narrative and all the choices you made, while you will also be allowed to jump back to key diverging moments to correct your choices if you so wish, rather than having to replay the entire chapter again. Replay value. Of course, as is the case with any game that has branching storylines, Detroit Become Human holds the promise of great replay value. The game is obviously going to have multiple endings, which inherently encourages multiple playthroughs, while the fact that if the developer's claims are anything to go by, even single chapters can turn out very differently based on your choices. The fact that you can jump directly to key past moments rather than having to replay each chapter as we already discussed is definitely going to help as well. Length. Even if you plan on playing through Detroit only once, it's going to be a fairly meaty experience. Quantic Dream claimed that a single playthrough of the game is going to last about 8 to 10 hours long. Sure, that length of time is nothing special for a game, especially in this era of open world games that last dozens of hours at times, but given the potential of its replay value, 8 to 10 hours for every playthrough sounds pretty good. PS4 Pro support. For those who have a PS4 Pro, Detroit Become Human will look noticeably better than the base version of the game. It will run at 30 frames per second, and while some might find that a little disappointing, the game will partially make up for that by outputting at 2160p, which it will achieve through checkerboarding. The game's user interface, though, will be outputted at a full 2160p, no checkerboarding. It will also feature volumetric lighting and include HDR support. Base PS4 version. On regular PS4s, Detroit Become Human won't run at 4K, of course. Instead, it'll be rendered at a resolution of 1080p, which is fairly standard, to be honest. Other than that, though, it'll mostly be similar to the PS4 Pro version with HDR support, volumetric lighting, and a frame rate of 30 frames per second. Digital Deluxe Edition. For those who purchase their games digitally, when Detroit Become Human launches on May 25th, they will also have the option of purchasing the Digital Deluxe Edition. Other than the game itself, the package will include Heavy Rain, as well as a dynamic theme for the PS4, a digital art book, and the game's official soundtrack, along with a handful of avatars for your PSN account. Detroit Become Human Digital Deluxe Edition will be priced at $69.99. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.